I used to think love was something that happened to other people. Not kids like me. Not kids who grew up in system beds with plastic mattress covers that crinkled every time you moved, who learned before they were old enough to ride a bike that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally could walk away without looking back. Love, the kind I saw on television and read about in the dog-eared paperback novels, left behind by previous foster kids in the houses I passed through. That kind of love felt like something reserved for people with stable addresses and mothers who showed up to school plays. I was 7 years old the first time I was placed. I remember my social worker's name was Patricia, and she wore the same beige cardigan every time I saw her, and she always smelled like coffee and something floral that I later identified as dryer sheets. She had kind eyes but a tired mouth, the kind of mouth that had said, "This is only temporary," so many times it no longer believed itself. She held my hand walking up the front steps of that first house in Columbus, Ohio, and I remember thinking her hand felt like a life raft. I held on so tight she had to gently pry my fingers loose at the door. That first placement lasted 4 months. The second lasted 7. By the time I was 12, I had lived in 9 different homes across 3 counties, attended 6 different schools, and learned how to pack everything I owned into a single black trash bag in under 10 minutes. That was the thing nobody tells you about foster care, the speed of it, how fast everything can end. How you wake up one morning thinking you're finally safe, and by afternoon you're in the backseat of a county car, watching another neighborhood blur past the window, trying to memorize the way the light looked through the trees, because it's the only thing you'll be able to keep. I got good at not wanting things. It's a survival skill they don't teach in school but should, because it is extraordinarily useful when your entire life is built on borrowed time and other people's furniture. Don't unpack your heart, don't hang your hope on anything, don't let yourself need anyone so much that their absence will hollow you out. I followed those rules for years, and for years they kept me intact. And then I met Dani. I was 15 when I was placed with the Mercer family in Dayton. It was late October, grey and cold in that particular Midwestern way that feels less like weather and more like a warning. Patricia, I'd had the same social worker for 3 years by then, which was itself a kind of miracle, drove me out to a neighborhood of older ranch homes with bare-limbed oak trees and American flags on front porches, and she told me in the car that this placement was different. There were already 2 foster kids in the home, a boy named Marcus who was 8, and a girl named Danielle who was 16. "She goes by Dani," Patricia said, eyes on the road. "She's been with the Mercers for almost 2 years. That's a good sign. It means they're stable." 2 years in one place, I couldn't even imagine it. The Mercers were good people. I want to say that clearly because the world has a habit of assuming the worst about foster families, and while I had certainly passed through homes that confirmed that assumption, the Mercers were not that. Gail Mercer was a heavyset woman with a loud laugh and a garden that took up half the backyard, and her husband Dennis worked for the county water department and coached a church softball league on weekends. They went to bed early. They kept the refrigerator stocked. They remembered your food allergies and asked about your day with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than obligation. They were the kind of people who turned the porch light on when you weren't home yet, and I don't think I can adequately explain what that meant to someone who had spent years feeling like their presence in any house was a bureaucratic arrangement rather than a human one. But it was Dani who changed everything. She was standing in the kitchen when Patricia walked me in, leaning against the counter eating an apple with the particular unself-consciousness of someone who had long since stopped performing ease and actually achieved it. She was tall, brown-skinned, with natural hair pulled up into a puff and eyes that assessed you quickly and filed you somewhere. I could feel it happening, that categorization, and I held still under it like an animal being examined. "You're the new one," she said, not unkindly, just direct. "I'm Ray," I said. "I know," she took another bite of her apple. Patricia called ahead, "You're from Columbus." "Yeah." She nodded like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Gail put you in the room across from mine. The closet door sticks. You have to lift the handle when you pull, otherwise it won't open." That was it. That was my introduction to Dani. She told me about the closet door and then she left the kitchen, and I stood there with my trash bag and my social worker and felt something I hadn't felt in years, the specific sensation of wanting to be near someone. Not needing them, not yet, just wanting. The way you want to stand closer to a fire when it's cold outside. We didn't become close right away. Dani wasn't cold, but she was careful. I recognized it because I was the same way. That particular brand of warmth held just a few inches back from where it could actually reach someone. We'd both learned it the same way, through the same repeated education of loss. We circled each other for weeks, polite and watchful, sharing a bathroom and a breakfast table, and the kind of careful small talk that means almost nothing and signals almost everything. The thing that broke it open was stupid. I was in the bathroom at 2 in the morning, sitting on the cold tile floor because I'd had the dream again, the one where I'm in a house that keeps rearranging itself, doors that lead to wrong rooms, staircases that end in walls, and I was shaking and trying to be quiet about it because I'd learned that vulnerability in other people's houses made you a problem and problems got moved. I didn't hear the door, I didn't hear her come in. I only realized she was there when she sat down on the floor next to me, her back against the bathtub, close enough that her shoulder was almost touching mine. She didn't ask what was wrong, she didn't tell me it was okay, she just sat there in the dark and the cold with the kind of quiet that only people who have survived real things know how to hold. After a while she said, "I have a thing I do when I can't sleep." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I name 5 things I know are true right now, not eventually, not later, right now." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. Like what? Like the floor is cold, the faucet drips, the hallway light is on. Gail left the dryer running downstairs, I'm not alone. She said it plainly. Like reciting a grocery list, and then she was quiet. I sat with it, the floor was cold. That was true, the faucet did drip, I could hear it. The hallway light threw a thin yellow line under the door. Somewhere below us, the dryer turned. "I'm not alone," I said. It came out smaller than I meant it to. "No," she said, "you're not." We sat there on the bathroom floor until I stopped shaking, and then we went back to our respective rooms, and neither of us mentioned it the next morning. But something had shifted. Something quiet and permanent, the way a river changes course so gradually you don't notice until the landscape around it is completely different. By January, we were inseparable. There is a specific kind of friendship that forms between girls who have been failed by the same systems, and it's unlike anything else I've ever experienced. It has no performance in it. There is no version of yourself you maintain for the other person's benefit because she has already seen you on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning and she didn't leave. There is nothing to protect. You are simply finally known, and knowing her was the closest thing to home I had ever found in an actual structure. We walked to the public library on Saturday mornings and split the cost of hot chocolate from the vending machine on the corner. We did our homework at the same table and argued about books. She loved non-fiction, biographies and true crime and histories of things, and I read fiction the way some people drink, not for pleasure exactly, but because I needed to be somewhere else for a while. We watched movies on her laptop under a shared blanket when the Mercers went to bed, and I fell asleep more nights than I can count with the sound of her breathing on the other side of the pause button. I knew I loved her before I understood what that meant. I think I knew the way you know things in your body before your brain catches up, the specific awareness of her in a room, the way my attention reorganized itself around her presence without my permission. I noticed when she was happy in a way that felt different from just observing someone else's emotion. When she laughed, something in my chest pulled like a thread being drawn tight, and I would look away and feel my face get warm and tell myself, it was just what close friendship felt like. That I didn't know because I'd never had it before, that this was normal. It wasn't normal, I knew it wasn't normal. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it yet, or the courage, or any framework that could hold it without breaking apart. My grandmother, my real grandmother, my mother's mother, who'd lost custody of me when I was 9, but who I still talked to on the phone sometimes until she died when I was 13, she used to say that the truth doesn't wait for you to be ready for it. It just arrives. And the only question is whether you open the door or keep pretending you don't hear the knock. The truth arrived for me on a Wednesday in March, when Dani was sick with a bad cold and I sat on the edge of her bed and read to her from a novel I'd been carrying around for weeks, and she fell asleep mid-chapter with her head tipped sideways and her face soft and unguarded, and I sat there with the book in my lap and looked at her and thought, with a clarity that felt like stepping out of a fog, I am in love with her. Not I love her, not she's my best friend, I am in love with her. I closed the book very quietly and sat with that for a long time in the dark of her room while she slept, and I felt 2 things simultaneously, the terrifying brightness of something true finally seen, and the deep, cold certainty that I could never, ever say it out loud. Here's what I knew about myself at 15, newly aware that I was gay, absolutely nothing. I had no framework for it. I had not grown up in a house with parents who had LGBTQ friends or watched shows with characters who looked like me or been given any roadmap at all for this particular territory. What I knew was what I'd absorbed from the world around me, from kids at various schools who used gay as an insult and said things that made clear that whatever I might be, it was something to be hidden or fixed. I knew that being different in any perceptible way made you a target, and I had survived years of institutional displacement precisely by making myself as target-free as possible. And I knew this above everything, that Dani was the most important person in my life, and that if I said the wrong thing I could lose her, not just the friendship, not just the closeness. I could lose the only person who made me feel like I existed in a way that mattered. So I didn't say anything. I locked it down and sat on it and told myself it would fade, that it was just intense friendship, that it would normalize once the novelty of real connection wore off. I had been alone so long, I told myself, that of course I was attaching too much to the first person who'd been genuinely kind to me. That's all it was. Attachment, confused wiring. It would pass. It didn't pass. Spring came and she got into a community college program that would let her start earning credits before she aged out of the system. She was 17, working towards something, and watching her build a future from scratch with no safety net, and no family money, and no one costing anything for her, was one of the most extraordinary things I had ever witnessed. She made a chart on her wall, actual graph paper, taped up in her neat handwriting, with the courses she needed, the costs, the timelines. She researched scholarships for foster youth for hours on that library laptop. She applied to everything. "You could do this too," she told me once, nodding at the chart. "I've got 2 more years in the system," I said. "So, start researching now. You'll thank yourself later." She handed me a printed list. She'd printed it for me specifically, without being asked, of scholarship programs for current and former foster youth. I folded it and put it in the front pocket of my bag, and I didn't tell her that I took it out at night sometimes, and just held it because it was tangible proof that someone had thought ahead on my behalf, that someone had thought about my future like it was a thing worth planning for. That someone was her. The summer was long and warm, and I was happier than I had ever been in my life, which, even as I was living it, I understood was its own kind of danger. Happiness was something that required conditions, the right placement, the right person, the right combination of circumstances, and none of those conditions were guaranteed. I turned 16 in August. Gail made a cake. Dennis put candles on it. Marcus drew me a card with a superhero on it because he'd asked me once what my favorite superhero was, and I'd said I didn't really have one, and he'd taken that as a personal challenge and decided I needed one. So he'd invented one called Ray Force, which had no discernible powers other than being extremely brave. I still have that drawing somewhere. I kept it through every move after. Dani gave me a book, a novel I'd mentioned once, weeks earlier, that I didn't think she'd remembered. She'd written inside the front cover, not a long inscription, just, "For Ray, who deserves a home," in every sentence. D. I cried in my room later when no one could see me. Not sad crying, the other kind, the kind that doesn't have a clean name. It was also that summer that I first understood she might feel something too. I don't know how to explain it, except to say that there is a particular quality to certain silences, the ones that aren't empty but full, the ones where what isn't being said takes up more room than anything spoken. We were sitting on the back porch one evening after dinner, the sky going pink and orange over Gail's garden, and we weren't talking about anything in particular, and I turned to say something, I don't even remember what, and found her already looking at me. And she didn't look away immediately the way people do when they're caught staring. She held it for just a moment too long, just a beat past where it would have been nothing. Then she looked away and said something about the garden, about how Gail's tomato plants were finally coming in, and I agreed, and we moved on, and I spent the next 3 days living inside that one moment, turning it over and over in my hands like a stone, trying to read what it meant. I was terrified to be right, I was terrified to be wrong. She aged out in November, turned 18 on a Thursday, and by the following Monday she had moved into a room in a transitional housing program for former foster youth on the other side of Dayton. It had been planned for months. She'd worked the system with the same meticulous preparation she brought to everything, but knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. The morning she left, she packed her 2 bags in the same methodical way she did everything, and I sat on her bare bed, mattress stripped, room already becoming impersonal, and watched her and felt the specific advance grief of losing someone who was still in the room. She hugged me at the door, longer than goodbye hugs usually last. "This isn't the end," she said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. I wasn't sure I believed it. "I'm 20 minutes away, I have a phone." She pulled back and looked at me directly. Her eyes were steady, but there was something in them I couldn't fully read, something pressed down and held. "You're not getting rid of me." "Okay," I said. "Ray," she said my name the way she always said it, not like a word but like something she meant. "You're going to be okay, even when it doesn't feel like it. You are going to be okay." I nodded and didn't trust myself to speak. She left. I stood at the window and watched the cab take her down the street, and then I went back to my room and sat on my bed and let myself feel the full weight of it for exactly 10 minutes. I counted, and then I put it somewhere inside me and closed the door on it and went downstairs and helped Gail make dinner. She kept her word. She texted, she called. She came over for dinner twice a month and sat at the Mercer table like she still belonged there, which she did, in the way that the people who have shared real time in a house together always carry a piece of it with them. She was taking 2 classes at the community college. She'd gotten a job at a coffee shop. She was building something. But things were different. They had to be. She had a life outside the perimeter of the house now, and I was still inside it, and the distance between us was not just geographic. She was becoming someone, was always becoming someone, but now I could see it more clearly, the shape of the person she was growing into, and I was still mid-formation, still dependent, still waiting for my own timeline to advance. I also, in those months, finally admitted to myself with complete honesty what I was. Not just what I felt for Dani, though that too, but the larger truth underneath it. I was gay. I sat with that word in the privacy of my own head and let it exist without immediately flinching away from it, and it was terrifying, and it was also the least surprising thing I had ever admitted, the way the truth usually is once you stop fighting it. It felt like finally naming something that had been in the room the whole time, patiently waiting to be acknowledged. I told no one. I wasn't ready. And more than that, the foster care environment was not one where I felt safe enough to be that visible. I had learned, through long practice, to read the emotional weather of whatever house I was in, and while the Mercers were good people, I did not know how they would respond, and I could not afford to find out the wrong way. So I held it quietly, this true thing about myself, like I'd learned to hold everything else, carefully internally, not taking up too much space. I almost told Dani in February. We were at a diner on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of old Ohio diner with red vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that came in ceramic mugs without you having to ask. It was sleeting outside. The windows were fogged. We'd been talking for 2 hours about nothing important and everything important the way we always did, and there was a moment when the conversation fell into one of its natural silences, and I looked at her across the table, at the steam rising from her mug, at her face soft and unsuspecting, and the words were right there. I could feel them in my mouth, ready. I'm in love with you. I think I have been since the day we met. I'm gay and I'm terrified, and you are the only person in my life I would trust with this, and I need you to know it. I didn't say them. I picked up my coffee and said something about her classes, and she answered, and the moment passed, and I filed it away with all the other moments I'd stored up like evidence of something I'd never be brave enough to prove. What stopped me wasn't cowardice, exactly, or maybe it was, but it was also something more complicated, a calculation I'd been running for months about risk and loss. If I told her and she felt something too, what then? We were both in systems, both unstable, both without the kind of foundation that could hold the weight of something real. And if I told her and she didn't feel the same way, or if she did and it frightened her, or if it changed the thing between us in any of the 1,000 ways it could change, I would lose the one true relationship in my life. I would lose the person who sat with me on cold bathroom floors and remembered my offhand mentions of novels and believed, without evidence, that I was going to be okay. I was not willing to risk her, even for the truth of her. April came with the thing I had been afraid of since the day I arrived. I was called into Patricia's office. She'd moved positions. She was at a desk now instead of driving the county car, and she told me with her tired, kind mouth and her genuine regret that the Mercers had made the difficult decision to stop fostering. Dennis had been diagnosed with a heart condition. Gail needed to be his primary caregiver. It wasn't about me. It was never about the kid, she said, and she wasn't wrong, but she also wasn't right. It was always somehow also about the kid. About the fact that we were the ones whose lives rearranged, while everyone else's stayed roughly in place. I packed my bag, the black one, under 10 minutes. I texted Dani from the back of the county car, I'm being moved. The reply came back in under minutes, where, are you okay? North Dayton, I'm okay. I'm coming over tonight. You don't have to. I'm coming over tonight, Ray. She came, she sat on the narrow bed in the new room in the new house, a couple named the Hendersons, quiet and decent, but strangers, and the room was beige and impersonal and smelled like someone else's fabric softener, and she didn't try to fix it or minimize it. She just sat there with me in the wreck of it and let it be what it was. You know what I think, she said after a while. What? I think you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I don't mean that the way people say it to make you feel better. She paused. I mean you have been through things that would break most people, and you are still here, still caring, still you. She looked at me. That's not nothing, Ray, that's everything. I looked at her looking at me and I thought, I love you. I thought, I will never stop loving you. I thought, I am going to carry this the rest of my life, exactly as it is, unnamed and held. Thank you, I said, for being here. She reached over and took my hand. Just held it, there in that beige room in someone else's house, with both our histories pressing in from all sides. Always, she said. I aged out on my 18th birthday. June, 2 years later, a warm morning that felt nothing like the occasion it was. I had a bag, a bus pass, a list of transitional housing programs Patricia had put together for me, and a scholarship application I'd been working on for 3 months for a program specifically designed for former foster youth at a community college in Columbus. Dani had helped me with the essay. We'd sat at the library for 4 Saturdays in a row going over it, and she'd read every draft and told me exactly what wasn't working and why, with the same directness she'd always had, the directness that felt like respect because it was. I got the scholarship. I know that part of the story is supposed to feel triumphant, and it did. I cried in the bathroom of the transitional housing office when the email came through, cried in the way that's partly joy and partly the release of years of held tension, the specific relief of a door opening after you'd stopped being sure doors still worked. But the feeling I want to talk about isn't the scholarship. It's what happened the day I left Dayton. Dani picked me up. She'd gotten a car by then, a beat-up Civic with a check engine light that she'd named Irene, for reasons she never fully explained, and she drove me the full hour and a half to Columbus herself. She didn't have to do that. She had work. She had her own life, fully assembled now, community college finished, job at a non-profit that helped connect foster youth with housing resources, a small apartment she'd been in for a year. She had a whole geography of existence that I was only a part of, and she gave up a Saturday to drive me to mine. We talked for the whole drive, the easy kind of talking, the kind that doesn't need a destination. We talked about her job and my scholarship and what we were scared of and what we were hoping for, and somewhere on the highway with the flat Ohio landscape opening up around us, I felt for the first time in my memory something that I can only describe as the sensation of having enough. Not abundance, not plenty, just enough. Enough love, enough known, enough of myself understood by someone who mattered to me, to feel like a real person, rather than a file number. We pulled up to the transitional housing apartment complex, a modest 4-story building near the college campus, clean and unremarkable and mine, and she helped me carry my bags up to the 2nd floor, and we stood in the small room with its window facing west and its linoleum floor and its smell of fresh paint and something possible. "Well," she said. "Well," I said. She looked around the room, and then she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I held one more time the truth I had been holding for 3 years. I felt it there, solid and real, the fact of loving her, the fact of how much she had given me without knowing the full shape of what I was carrying. "I need to tell you something," I said. My heart was going very fast. She waited, watching me with those same careful eyes that had assessed me in the Mercer kitchen years ago and filed me somewhere. I hoped she'd filed me somewhere good. "I'm gay," I said, just that, starting there with the true thing I could finally say out loud. She was quiet for a moment, then she nodded slowly. "I know," she said. I stared at her. "You knew?" I didn't know, I thought. The corner of her mouth moved, for a while now. "Why didn't you?" I stopped. "Why didn't you say anything?" She looked at me for a long time. Something complicated moved across her face, something careful being set down, some long-held thing being released. Because it wasn't mine to say, it had to be yours. I stood there with that, the truth of it, the rightness of it, and underneath it the other thing, the question I still hadn't asked, that was sitting right there on the surface now. "Dani," I said her name the way she always said mine, like something I meant. "Was there ever?" I stopped, started again. "Did you ever feel?" "Yes," she said, quietly, cleanly, no performance in it, just the word. The room was very still. "Why didn't you?" "Same reason you didn't." She looked down at her hands briefly, then back at me. "You were the most important thing. I wasn't going to risk the most important thing." I thought about the bathroom floor, the library, the diner, 4 years of held silences and careful distances and choosing the relationship over the risk. Both of us doing the same math, both of us arriving at the same answer. "We are both idiots," I said. She laughed, that real laugh, unguarded, the one I had loved for years. And then we were both laughing, and the room was full of it. The absurdity and the tenderness and the years of accumulated unspoken things, finally allowed to exist in the open air. What happened after that is ours. I don't need to tell all of it here. What I'll say is this: we took it slowly. Because we were both people who had learned the hard way that slow was sometimes the only safe speed. We had years of friendship underneath us, and we built on that carefully, with the same meticulous attention she brought to her college charts, and I brought to the stories I read, sentence by sentence, page by page, towards something we were both choosing for the first time in our lives. What I will tell you is what I know now, at 23, standing on the other side of a life that once felt like it was happening to me and now feels, some days, most days, like it's something I'm building with my own hands. Love is not something that happens to other people. It is not reserved for those with stable addresses or mothers who show up. It does not wait for the right conditions, or the right moment, or the right version of yourself to appear. It finds you on bathroom floors at 2 in the morning. It sits beside you without being asked. It drives you across Ohio in a car named Irene. It says I know when you finally say the thing you've been carrying, and it looks at you across a small room that smells like fresh paint, and it chooses you after all of it, after every move and every loss and every carefully packed black trash bag. It chooses you. I spent years believing I wasn't the kind of person things lasted for. Turns out, I just hadn't found the thing worth lasting yet. Now I have, and I'm not letting go.